We saw this very contentious hearing on Capitol Hill with the TikTok CEO. It seems like, listening to lawmakers, the only two really viable options on the table right now is to have the Chinese parent company sell TikTok or for the US government to ban TikTok. But China has come out and said very clearly it firmly opposes the sale of TikTok. So does that mean that a ban is really the only way forward?
There's grave danger here. We've worked so hard to get the hardware of Chinese technology out of our telecommunication systems, to invite them back in by an app where people give them access to their data and where through algorithms they can manipulate what it is that you see. Is a great danger. It's really, there's a public interest. I think it's a government interest in this. If China would choose to just ban it and remove it as opposed to divest it, that would be their choice. But I do think that there are opportunities for divestiture. That would ensure that the data doesn't end up in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, but also that the algorithms are not propaganda-based, but are actually based upon what we normally see from a social network.
So you're saying if the parent company were to sell TikTok, you believe it would be safe to use in the U.S.?
Well, if it becomes truly an American company and not owned and influenced by China, because the problem in China is, of course, there's no division between China corporations, China itself, and the Chinese Communist Party with respect to the able to penetrate data, algorithms, and influence. And that's what we have great concern about.
The company says in the U.S. there are 150 million users. There are 5 million businesses that use TikTok to promote their services. Do you understand why Americans might be hesitant to see this app banned?
Well, I think the issue is, I think people don't really understand what they're surrendering. I mean, they're thinking of this as an entertainment app. They're not seeing this as a propaganda app. They're not seeing it as an access to their data. I mean, if you ask the average American, do you think that China should own your telecommunications companies and that they should control and be in charge of your phone? Of course, they would say no. But if you ask them, about TikTok, it looks harmless. It looks like it's entertainment, but in fact, it's surrendering the same systems that we've tried to protect in the same manner.
I do have to ask you about the response that we heard from the foreign ministry in China saying, quote, the U.S. should earnestly respect the principles of market economy and fair competition, stop suppressing foreign companies, and provide an open, fair, and just and non-discriminatory environment for foreign companies operating in the U.S. What do you make of that?
Don't you find it interesting that their government feels the need to respond? I mean, they're saying we're not involved, but yet they're the ones that are responding. I think that in of itself shows the government interest in this. It certainly is irony to have them in a situation where they would say such things that clearly are not true.
I also want to get your take on the talks that we saw President Xi hold with President Putin in Moscow earlier this week. You were happy that China didn't publicly announce that it was delivering weapons to Russia for its war in Ukraine, but do you believe that China will deliver weapons to Russia?
It's really possible. What was really chilling there is to watch President Xi say to Putin, we're going to bring about change together that has not happened in 100 years. Well, 100 years ago, we had World War I and World War II, and that was where, really freedom and democracy was fighting against authoritarianism. Clearly, his reference is saying that they want authoritarianism to win. The problem here is that China doesn't just have strained relationships with the United States. By their statement with Putin, by his statements with Putin and with Russia, they really have strained relationships with democracy and freedom, and that is going to be a telling problem for them in the future.
But I do want to get your take on this as the House Intelligence Chairman. Do you believe that China is about to send weapons to Russia to use in the war in Ukraine?
We know that China was certainly considering that information that we had is a form of intelligence that was declassified, that our director of CIA, Director Burns, came out and stated that China was in the process of deciding whether or not to send weapons. By making it public, we certainly hope it to impact that outcome and that decision-making.
You've also been very critical of President Biden for being too weak on China, but I want to bring your attention to a number. Trade between the U.S. and China last year totaled nearly $700 billion. So what does a more muscular approach look like? Does it mean embargoing all products coming from China, closing all embassies? What does that look like?
Well, no, of course not. I think what he needs to be strong about is he needs to call Putin out on it. Remember, as soon as Xi left with his meeting with Putin, you found the spokesperson from the Biden administration saying, well, there's not really an alliance between them. I think they need to call it an alliance. I think they need to understand that these two are working actively together, that China sees Putin and Russia as its partner and not the West.
So a tougher approach would mean calling that relationship and alliance?
Well, you first have to start acknowledging what is occurring. And she openly said, this is change that hasn't happened in 100 years. This administration has ignored that. They continue to ignore China's own statements. And I think that part of being able to assert diplomacy so we don't have conflict is to at least to be able to identify what your adversaries are doing by their own words.